Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. It is Friday, May 31st, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
We have a full house because we have to talk about the verdict in the Trump trial, 34 convictions on 34 separate counts. I'm not going to introduce this. I'm not going to describe it. We're just going to go right into it. So, show of hands, not that anyone can see hands. How many of us think that Trump has committed crimes in his life that he has gone unpunished for, shall we say? So I think
felonies or misdemeanors. Felonies or misdemeanors.
Or felonies.
Important question.
Right, just the crime is a pretty wide range of things.
I would guess that all five of us probably accept the idea that he has committed crimes in the past for which he has gone unpunished. And I think that's the context in which we want to talk about this verdict in one way, which is that emotionally, particularly for the people who are ecstatic at the verdicts yesterday, they don't really care what it was that he was convicted for. What they wanted was a conviction because it was time for him to pay. People said this. People said it in the days leading up to it. Michael Cohen himself said it at some point, the lead witness against him. And so I think in that context, this is how the conversation is going to be framed going forward. Donald Trump is a convicted felon because he spent his life getting away with things, and now the chickens have come home to roost, and he has not gotten away with things. Paying off a porn star seems to be the thing. We're buying the silence of the American, using the National Enquirer to buy off the silence of people. Is another. The question, of course, is whether any of these things that he was convicted for are actually crimes or are crimes that should have been raised from a misdemeanor to a felony level. So I think we want to start there.
Well, I think it's important to point out that for the past year, we have been saying on this podcast that the indictment Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, brought against Trump was the weakest of the four cases in which Trump finds himself charged. And our view that this case was weak because, as you say, it's unclear what the underlying crime was. Falsifying business records is a misdemeanor, yet Bragg boosted it up to a felony by referring to some unnamed crime, which people, I guess, reading the pig entrails, deduced was a federal election violation. So the charges, the theory behind it, they're always very weak, kind of a Rube Goldberg machine. And that's something we pointed out on the podcast. And it's something that a lot of the rest of the world pointed out too, including liberal legal professors in the pages of the New York Times. And it's stunning to me that the second this verdict was announced, all the liberals switched and said, "How dare you question this verdict? How dare you, sir, say that this jury got it wrong? This is the most important day because the Bragg case won the conviction. Doesn't matter what the details are." But I think the details matter quite a bit. And I think that there's good reason to suspect that this will be overturned on appeal, like many other cases involving politicians, whether it's John Edwards or the former governor of Virginia, Bob for Jobs McDonnell. So that's what the reflexive defense of what had been considered indefensible is what really strikes me about the reaction.
I need to give the example of this, okay? Right now, I've just pulled up from the Washington Post its premier legal columnist, Ruth Marcus, from March 13th, 2023. if you hope that Donald Trump will face criminal charges for at least some of his misdeeds, there is a prospect worse than the possibility that the former president will not be indicted. When you strike at a king, you must kill him, the saying goes, and it applies with force in the case of Trump, which is why, as much as I'd like to see Trump held to account, I am nervous about reports that New York District Attorney Alvin Bragg is poised to seek an indictment relating to the payoffs he orchestrated to silence a one-time lover porn star, Stormy Daniels. So this is before Bragg announced the indictments. That's March 2023. Let's just watch Ruth Marcus.
I'll tell you what she said. One thing she said already: the jury's verdict is entitled to substantial, indeed almost conclusive respect. Justice Juan Merchan presided over the trial with admirable even-handedness and restraint. That's Ruth Marcus yesterday or today.
Yes. So, let's talk about the case where none of us is a lawyer.
Okay, I have just one more note on that. Because, for decades, the conservative critique of liberal jurisprudence was it was results-based jurisprudence, that judges were making law in order to achieve the egalitarian result that they had always wanted. And I think this is a clear example of results-based legal analysis, which is the second they got the result they wanted, it's like, oh, okay, great. How dare you? Whereas if you had a hung jury or a mistrial, then the liberals who had critiqued the case all along would have said, well, we knew it was always going to be a hard job to pull off, but, at least we tried. But they got what they wanted. And at the end of the day, that's the takeaway here.
Andy McCarthy of National Review and was on Fox and is a commentary contributor and a good friend of ours, has said two things. And this is very important because you can think two things at the same time. Like, yes, I believe that Trump is a criminal and that he has evaded criminal prosecution. I don't quite know for what, but I'm sure this is the case, that this was a bad case, and that the judge and the prosecutor, in effect, colluded to create the conditions under which a jury would find it incredibly easy to convict Trump. Secondly, and this is important because as we go forward, the Trump has been horribly mistreated thing is going to come up as the main talking point on the right, and maybe it should, is that Trump's defense was catastrophic. And we know that for two reasons, one of which is that the jury barely considered this case. There were 34 charges. It was complicated. They listened for 6 weeks. They came back with a verdict after 6 hours of deliberation. That means that the Trump defense did not penetrate to them at all. So either the fix was in with this jury the minute that they sat down and they wanted to convict him, or that Trump's defense was a catastrophe. And Andy had been saying for weeks that Trump's defense was a catastrophe because since he forced his lawyer to stipulate that Trump had had no relationship either with Stormy Daniels, the porn star, or Karen McDougal, the woman whose story was bought and caught and killed by the National Enquirer, that had he stipulated, yes, I did it, and I was either trying to spare my wife embarrassment or I wanted the story out because it wasn't going to be helpful to me. And she'd signed a non-disclosure agreement years ago. And there's nothing wrong with me paying her. There's nothing illegal as long as it's all properly reported to the IRS as a payment and that she reports it to the IRS and all of that. His lawyer, Todd Blanche, was forced to argue that Trump was innocent of the charges because he had never done anything that would have caused him to pay the money. And that if you're a juror sitting in that jury box, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Obviously, he did it, and he's not telling us the truth about why these payments were made. So why should we believe anything else about him? The Trump people are trying to make a case that Michael Cohen is a serial liar. Trump's own lawyer, not that he was lying, he was staging the defense that his client wanted for reasons that we can get into. Trump, maybe the fix was in from the beginning and the case should never have been brought. Trump is responsible for the contents of his defense, and he made the worst possible defense, which is, yes, Non-disclosure agreements are legal. I had one with her. She was like threatening to break it. I made a second, essentially. I paid her off again. Yes, I had to do it because of various reasons, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he didn't do that. So before everybody martyrs Trump, let's just make it clear that he didn't give the jury any reason to acquit or to hang, because all he was saying is Michael Cohen is a liar. Michael Cohen is a liar, and Stormy Daniels is a porn star, and
so there's
that
one
probably
other
would have been enough. That would have been enough for me, but I don't think it was clearly insufficient for the jury.
Well, there's one other part of Andy McCarthy's analysis, which we should mention, which is that the reason Trump pursued this line of defense, which obviously did not work, was because Trump was thinking in political terms rather than legal ones. And there's a political element to this case that cannot be ignored. And so martyr Trump, come on. No one on this podcast is going to do that. But take a step back. This case should not have been brought to begin with.
Yes.
It was brought for political purposes. And I think we should point out what Susan Collins said in her statement reacting to the conviction. Susan Collins, not a Trump fan. Right? I mean,
voted for impeachment.
Not a MAGA Republican.
Voted for impeachment.
But she said in her statement that one of the foundations of our legal system is the idea that the law is blind, and that you bring the identity of the person under prosecution should not matter. And she says, in this case, it obviously mattered. That this case would not have been brought had the defendant not been Donald Trump. And that, I think, is what has animated the right in its reaction to the conviction. And it's also why Bragg ended up unifying the Republican Party behind Trump. I think it's really, again, one other ridiculous element of the liberal celebration of this conviction, in my view, is that they think this is it. Oh, Trump's going to jail. Election's over. The election's over. And I know we'll talk about the political implications later in the podcast, but that's the reaction. No. What the actual consequence of the Bragg case was that Donald Trump won a third consecutive Republican nomination for the presidency.
Well, and
because the injustice of the charges rallied the party around him and continues to do so.
Yes, it really did clarify, didn't it? The gap, the chasm, growing chasm between the half of the country that's like, this was a clearly partisan political effort at selective prosecution. My favorite headline from, I don't know when it was, fairly recently, like, will Trump be convicted of, several misdemeanors and a mystery felony was how it was phrased. But in some sense, that's right? The felon word is very politically powerful, or at least that's the view of the people on the other side of the chasm who just think no one is above the law. We got to get him somehow. We'll just do it however we can. The sexual peccadillos are a good entry point. They worked with, they tried to do it with Clinton. We're going to do it with him, et cetera, et cetera. American people actually tend to be more forgiving of the sexual peccadillos. And I think you're right, John, that they would have, if he just acknowledged it and moved on, it would have been a more powerful defense. But now we have this chasm, and this is bad for our system, for the justice system, because that mystery felony is a federal crime, right? It was never named by Bragg. The indictment doesn't clearly state he violated any federal election rules. But even if he did, Bragg is not the person to prosecute that. He is not a federal prosecutor. So there are all kinds of weird legal things in here. And again, like you said, we're not lawyers, but even a layman can look at this and go, what a weird case. And that does help, as Matt said, for the appeal process.
Well, this is an important point, because we have two avenues for appeal for Trump. Whether this matters or not, I don't know. One is the question of what went on in the courtroom and the rulings and various decisions made by Judge Merchan along the way, and whether they in aggregate or individually constitute a form of reversible error that will cause them, which I think is what will cause them to be thrown out. Despite Ruth Marcus's claim and the bizarre claims, I listened all yesterday afternoon to MSNBC. I was on a long drive. I was listening on Sirius XM. And I mean, I thought I was taking, yes, crazy pills because of the incredible, I don't know if you know this, but Judge Merchan, his demeanor, his conduct of this case was so
Mother Teresa of the judiciary.
Perfect.
Yes.
And Atticus Finch could not have done it better.
Yes, he was Atticus Finch. This is the guy who yelled at a witness for giving him side eye. How dare you give me side eye? Who yelled at the defendant
or when
constantly.
Now he's got half the country giving him side eye.
He told the Trump team that he wouldn't rule for a mistrial after Stormy Daniels' salacious and completely irrelevant testimony because they hadn't objected enough.
Yeah.
You didn't object enough.
Yeah. I mean, to me, and I've used this before, this is Judge Dean Wormer. This is Dean Wormer at the administrative hearing on whether or not Delta House is going to get thrown out, saying, "You'll get your chance, smart guy." I mean, that seemed to be the way he handled the entire case. But this notion that he somehow had conducted himself with unbelievable restraint and admirable balance, and Ruth Marcus saying the same thing, and Andrew Weissman, the world's toughest prosecutor, saying like he had a man crush.
Don't you think Andrew Weissman feels left out? Don't you think
he didn't get to be the prosecutor?
The psychological burden that he didn't get to be the one in the courtroom. Yeah. His friend Matthew Colangelo or whatever, the Justice Department official who quit so that he could help out the prosecution. Yeah. He gets all the glory. And there, Andrew Weissman, he's sitting next to Andrea Mitchell and can only comment on it. I feel sad for Andrew.
Well, he's getting paid a lot more money than Matthew Colangelo. Let me just put it that way.
Now,
But so there's that question, which is a state question, right? And then there is a question that Trump is going to ask the Supreme Court to fast track, which is, was this effort to make a federal crime into a felony that could be prosecuted at the state level, that is a campaign finance violation, is that constitutional? Was the Constitution's, was the setup of the judiciary and the Constitution violated by this procedure? And I think that's maybe pretty much an open and shut case. I just don't think it's going to be heard in time, and certainly to somehow muddy those waters. And certainly the New York State appeal will take much, much longer. People have to remember, appeals courts are very loath to overturn a jury verdict. Like, that is not, to do so on judge's error is a very, very hard lift. It's 12 citizens.
Of those two appeal scenarios, I think the Supreme Court one is the one that Democrats really want, because you have two questions, as you said. One is, did they conduct the trial fairly, etc.? And one is, was this essentially a kind of witch hunt in a way? I mean, did he charge something he shouldn't have charged, and the whole thing was, rigged, let's say, or whatever? I think the Democrats are fine with the Supreme Court stepping in and either saying, prosecution was fine, I don't want to, whatever. And then they can say, even the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court rules that it was improper, and the talking point is, oh, look, he put the illegitimate president, packed the court, right, with all these illegitimate judges who shouldn't be there, who stole seats, and he packed the court, and the court came through and returned the favor, and these Trump-appointed judges just set Trump free, even though a jury trial convicted him of 34 felonies. So I think, like that, in terms of the politics of it, I think that Democrats are actually fine. If it goes to the Supreme Court, I think they're actually fine either way, which is part of the reason they're building up this stuff about the stupid pine tree flag and all this other. It's not just the January 6th case, but I think that they know that this Trump stuff may also be back at the Supreme Court, because it is important enough to it's hard to make the argument that you shouldn't fast track this particular case, right? If you're going to fast track anything. So,
but in some sense, I mean, even if Trump took the other route and won on an appeal, Democrats or liberals, they like when the system doesn't work, because they can say the system doesn't work. We see it in so many cases. We see it in for so many people out there who have suffered because of our broken system, and it didn't work this time. That's exciting for them either way. But I got to say, I don't think they want any reversal here. I think they are over invested in Trump as a convict.
I got to say, I think Seth's analysis is quite brilliant. I mean, I agree that they would prefer not to have any reversal or anything like that. But I think it's as though they've been playing a long game with the Supreme Court. Remember, the Clarence Thomas is getting an RV and stuff like that story. That is a ProPublica campaign.
Well, it's a long-term campaign to delegitimize the institution. Right. Yes.
But let's talk about the sources of the ProPublica campaign. ProPublica is a nonprofit investigative journalism entity that is funded with approximately $2 billion of Democratic activist money. So they are trying to get Clarence Thomas's scalp, which is not going to work because they have no recourse. They are now trying to get Alito's scalp through his wife and the flag. Yesterday, there was a story about how Amy Coney Barrett's husband, who you may know is a lawyer, he is a lawyer, and apparently Fox is now a client of his law firm, and therefore she should recuse herself from everything. How convenient that is. So we got Alito, we got Thomas, and we got Barrett, all under attack at the same time. It is as though, like I say, they have been laying the predicate for any decision that the Supreme Court makes, not even Dobbs, because it didn't quite come up this way, but in relation to Trump saying, this is how it works. Trump got in, he appointed 3 justices, he spun the court his way, he is trying to destroy democracy. One of the 2 other branches of government is joining him in the destruction of democracy. Anything that it does, any finding that it finds that does not comport with what we want is illegitimate. And that is one of the 2 avenues, right, of the appeal. The other avenue, which I think is probably more likely to find root, depending on what the circumstances are, if he gets a fair appeals court panel, there's a lot there to chew on the question of John Jabershyan's conduct in this trial. It is a jury verdict. The verdict was and it does matter, by the way, that the verdict was reached quickly, because it's not like they sweated over it. Harvey Weinstein, it took 6 days.
You also have
for the jury to convict Harvey Weinstein, and that played a role in the overturning of the Weinstein verdict.
You have to recognize, though, the way in which Merchan, Judge Learned Hand, wrote the jury instructions made it almost inevitable for them to reach the verdict quickly, because of the way he instructed them to deliberate, what he excluded from their deliberations, the fact that he said in these instructions that it wasn't even necessary for all 12 to agree that that a particular crime or particular charge was well-founded. So I think that played a role in the speed at which they reached the verdict. Remember, we had that weird moment where they received their instructions and they went into the jury room, and then they came back out and said, hey, could you read us the instructions again? And then that's what they spent Thursday morning doing. And as soon as they got the instructions again, it was only a few hours before they reached the verdict. So I do think that plays a role, and I think that will be part of Trump's appeal, that the judge just railroaded him.
Right. But the appeal isn't going to matter unless either the Supreme Court fast tracks it, and on the grounds that the 2024 election is a material event in American political history that this shadow should not be hanging.
Well, that appeal will hang on the charge whether Bragg could have brought this type of federal charge.
Right. Which, by the way, is interesting because that's procedural. So I would say this, which is that the Supreme Court could say Bragg didn't have the right to bring this charge, sort of like Obama doesn't have the right to, legitimize. I mean, sort of like the DACA ruling. Like Obama doesn't have the constitutional right to do X, Y, or Z, and the judge in this case did not have the right to do X,
and that
Y,
gives
or Z,
them an out, right? They don't have to start interrupt, but then they don't have to take the political argument, which actually there's plenty of evidence that he also engaged in selective prosecution. He said, we have his statements on the record saying, I'm going after Trump. Like they're literally there. So, yeah.
No, but what I'm saying is that doesn't get to the finding. Right. The question, and therefore Democrats would be in better shape. Not, if the state says the whole case was garbage, then they're in trouble. If the Supreme Court says, look, we're not making any findings as to fact here, all we're saying is that the process of his indictment in the first place did not follow proper procedure in terms of how this works. And then the jury verdict is not questioned. Do you see what I'm saying? Like the jury, the jury found once the case was brought to them is not questioned.
But Trump will still spin that as exoneration.
Yeah, of course.
And so the question is, again, the short-sightedness of liberal reactions to this verdict is so mind-boggling to me. Sentencing has been designated for, I believe, July 11th, which is 4 days before the beginning of the Republican convention. Convenient, right? But Trump can't appeal until the sentencing, is my understanding.
Yes.
So let's say he gets sentenced. Well, who knows what Merchan will do. He then appeals directly to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court takes up the case in September. We get a ruling saying the case was baloney mid-September. Trump will come out and say, right around the time of the second debate, or right after the second debate, as early voting is beginning, Trump will say, "Look, I was exonerated." So the way in which this the unintended consequences of this conviction will play out is something that very few people have spent any time contemplating, because they are so in need, John, as you say, of the psychological satisfaction that they got Trump. He's just like Al Capone, someone said to me the other. He said, Al Capone. They got Al Capone on tax fraud. They got Trump on this thing.
Well, like OJ. They got OJ on,
Al Capone and OJ were murderers. They were murderers. I mean,
Trump murdered democracy, though.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So just to close up on the trial, so there's going to be this, there is this liberal victory lap, a sense of real relief that at last they got him. What have they been trying to get him on forever? They tried to get him on personal peccadillo conduct in 2015, 2016. They tried to get him on his taxes to the extent that somebody leaked 20 years of his taxes in contravention of every known norm that we have in American life regarding the protection of personal information filed with confidential filed with the federal government. They tried to get him on the perfect phone call to Ukraine. They tried to get him on Russiagate. They tried to get him on, I think there are like 3 or 4 other things, and nothing worked. Nothing worked. They couldn't even get him on January 6th when he deserved to be gotten. So now they've gotten, and so it doesn't matter what they got him on. They thought that he was guilty of everything. They think that everything he does is, a matter of guilt. And so in the Al Capone case, it's like, fine. I mean, if this is what it is, if it's paying off Stormy Daniels in an illegitimate fashion, even though the argument that is being made here, again, to talk about short-sightedness, this verdict will only be a precedent in New York State, right? Because it's a state court. It is now an open question whether, if anyone fails to disclose a material fact about themselves in an election henceforth in New York State around the time of the election, a fact that might have an effect on the way people vote for them, after the election is over and that person wins and the rival is defeated, a prosecutor can gin up a charge that says that the election was interfered with because the person in question knew something about himself he did not disclose. That is the weird raising to the felony point that is Bragg's claim here.
Or consider the ruling in the Judge Engoron case on Trump's business, where it's unclear what exactly happened or who was harmed by the financial statements that Trump was providing to the banks who were continuing to give him money and were satisfied with the way in which he was conducting his business.
Yeah.
The ramifications of that ruling for the business climate of New York State.
Right. So
the victims in that case seem to not want Trump prosecuted.
Right. No, the point
literally the victims were uncomfortable. Right. The so-called victims in the Engoron case were really uncomfortable with this whole thing being played out as a crime.
Right. No. So in other words, you can now be accused of fraud when you didn't commit fraud, and you can now be accused of a campaign finance violation in the furtherance of a conspiracy to control the results of an election, which is the Pandora's box. I mean, that is the thing about, the way you're supposed to prosecute things, and why, as Susan Collins said, justice is supposed to be blind, because you create precedents that are runaway precedents, and who knows what an ambitious prosecutor in 2028 will want to do in order to get a headline, an elected prosecutor who wants to be elevated to the governor of New York State or whatever. Or
Well, don't even stick to blue states. An ambitious red state prosecutor is going to indict Joe Biden, because if you look at the statement, I was fascinated by the statement that Biden's campaign, not I think the president's statement was just, we believe in the rule of law or whatever. We respect the rule of law, no comment. But the campaign spokesman went on at length and said, we see no one is above the law. Donald Trump mistakenly believed he would never face consequences for breaking the law for his own personal gain. Today's verdict says, you've got to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, convicted felon or not. So they're going to be deploying the felon language a lot. But it was that phrase about, he committed a crime for personal gain. I'm thinking, wow, does the Biden family want to open up its books and start talking about using one's political power for personal gain? I mean, this is a Pandora's box in terms of what again, and this speaks to the broader issue of the rule of law and people's faith in the justice system. And it's going to be bad. It's very bad for our system, regardless of whether you want a D or an R in the White House.
Can I just say, well, one other thing about the left's reaction to this that is very strange is that the campaign is now, do you want a convicted felon running for do you want a convicted felon in the White House? You don't think he's going to steal the China? Like, there's a real weird kind of like, this person has been convicted. He was prosecuted and convicted. He's obviously therefore bad and a criminal, and you can't have him in polite society.
What happened to the ban the box movement? Aren't we supposed to get the criminal records off the job application forms?
Right. This can't even have mug shots anymore. No mug shots.
Justice reform.
And even in cases, they're always trying to get
Matt,
arrests thrown
hold on.
out of
there's no way to take criminal justice reform movement seriously any longer. The liberal reaction to the scarlet C that has been put on Donald Trump as convicted felon, where I've spent the last 12 years of my life listening to liberals say, you can't judge a person because they committed a crime. You can't judge. Felons should have voting rights. You can't.
And this is a nonviolent crime also. Nonviolent is a very important codicil to that in their propaganda.
Nonviolent crime. Who is harmed by the nonviolent crime? You can't, we need to reform our justice laws so that we are treating everyone equitably. And now on a dime, they say this is he's haram. You can't look at him now that he is a convicted felon. Something called the Council of DC, which I believe is the district legislature. I'm looking at it up now. Tweeted when the verdict came down. Council of DC at Council of DC on X.
Yeah, that's our city council. They're a nightmare. Yes.
This is the post. No one is above the law. the Council of DC, which wants to let the violent criminals out.
Yes. Which once included Mayor Barry. Marion Barry used to be on that.
Yeah, right.
By the way,
after
Barry.
he was...
Right.
It's absurd, John.
Okay, this I think is an interesting analogy. Let's go back to Clinton and the net effects of Calvin Ball, where you decide that your people don't commit crimes, but only the other person commits crimes. The 1990s began as a feminist decade. The year of the woman, 1992. Anita Hill was mistreated, supposed terrible sexual harassment, all of this goes on and on. Then Bill Clinton is accused of improper conduct with a 21-year-old intern who works in the White House. And the entire entire world of liberal opinion flips and supports him. And for 20 years, the sexual harassment problem disappears, except on college campuses, from all American public discourse until Donald Trump comes in and we have the Access Hollywood tape. And then we're back with the sexual misbehavior of prominent people in relation to people who work with him or are around him. And then, and this is where the cautionary tale comes in, who gets punished by Me Too? Democratic donor Harvey Weinstein, Democratic Senator Al Franken, Democratic donor Les Moonves, the head of CBS. Republicans didn't get nailed, didn't get hoist on that petard. It was a 20-year. So in this case, we have 20 years of criminal justice reform, or 10 years, thrown out the window because we now have to throw the book at all felons. All felons, anyone convicted of anything, everything you cannot. Yes,
the rights of the accused, prosecutorial discretion. Juries sometimes they've reached the wrong conclusion. Just because a jury said the person was guilty doesn't mean that's the case. All of these tropes that have been thrown at us for decades, by the way, by the same donors who support Bragg and the various legal attempts to intimidate Justices Alito and Thomas, as we were talking about earlier, the same people. Now, there's no possible, I didn't take them seriously at the time, but there's really no way to take them seriously now because they have now say that, this verdict that convicted, as soon as you say the words convicted felon, all thought must stop.
Okay.
And as a smart libertarian friend of mine said yesterday to me, essentially the prosecution against Trump in his mind was fairly normal, and that's why liberals hate it. That's why liberals hate this. Like what happened to Trump actually happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, I know.
And that's a bad thing. Therefore, that's a bad thing. Right. In other words, Trump didn't get necessarily especially evil treatment.
Well, all prosecutions are illegitimate. According to libertarians, all prosecutions are illegitimate.
I will say
Trump
this,
but also
is the ultimate illegitimate prosecution.
This was like, this was bad. But if you think this was bad, then, this is just kind of the normal ways that things go, except in his other point was that usually people get sort of elbowed into plea deals and just, have to admit to stuff. But Trump didn't do that because he's, he has certain protections. So he was like, his broader point was that liberals should hate this because in their mind, this was a normal case brought in the normal judicial process.
Ultimately, that's, I think, Matt's point, which is that view, this idea is all disingenuous. Everything here is disingenuous. And we can get to conservative disingenuousness too, if we want to what about it.
Just think about the doublethink not the doublethink, but the logic of the headline on our friend David Frum's reaction piece in The Atlantic. The headline is "Wrong Case, Right Verdict." Well, how can, if it's the wrong case, then the verdict should be wrong too, right? I mean, it doesn't. I don't think that's the way it works. In response to Seth, this is another way in which the Trump era has like strengthened my libertarian muscles. As a neoconservative, they're kind of weak. Us neocons, we're not the best friends of libertarians. But something about the Trump era has made my libertarian side more acute, more vocal, whether it's on issues of trade, whether it's even on the issues of treatment of immigrants, right? And in particular on this point of fact, which is the legal system and the rule of law. Because once you just start, and this is visible, by the way, with the Kavanaugh case as well, which is an interesting parallel, but once you just start throwing all of these procedural norms out the window, really, you're in a man for all seasons. You're in for who will defend you then.
No, my first like, are we taking crazy pills moment really was when the left began this campaign early in the Trump years that like, how dare you criticize the FBI?
Yeah,
right. Exactly.
Right. No,
that was the one that made me go in my. This is Twilight.
Oh no. Mine. Okay, mine. By the way, was way before that, which was when David Korn of The Nation, a disciple of the Soviet agent I.F. Stone, and a supporter of journalistic efforts to out covert CIA agents across the world who were then threatened and in one case were actually assassinated, getting all high and mighty and huffy at the treatment of Valerie Plame, the supposed covert, though not covert, CIA agent in the Joseph Wilson Niger yellow cake case. Suddenly, David Korn is like, this patriot, this wondrous patriot working her fingers to the bone to help American security is now, is being criticized by evil Bush. And then I'm like, oh my God. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. You literally worked for a Soviet agent and now you're accusing conservatives of outing a CIA agent who, under other circumstances, her naming and shaming and possible assassination, you might have thought was perfectly fine, depending on the circumstances. So that was 2004, 2005. I can't remember what year.
2003 was when it started.
Okay, yeah. So
20 years.
Like some of us, yes.
Yeah, I agree.
As Daniel Bell once said, many people's anti-Stalinists, had this Kronstadt moment. That was when the Bolsheviks started killing the Mensheviks, and they had this was their Kronstadt. His Kronstadt moment was Kronstadt. So my taking crazy pills was the Valerie Plame moment. So but it goes back all this.
By the way, David Korn,
yes,
supports this verdict.
I know.
You'll be surprised to learn.
He believes in the
jury reached the right decision. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on from from this to the politics, which is clearly actually the only thing that matters here. The case is brought, as Trump is going to claim, at 11 o'clock when he has his press conference. The purpose of this case, nominally about election interference, according to Bragg's essentially narrative of the case, is to prevent him from getting reelected in 2024. All legal action against Trump from 2016 onward, every effort, special prosecutors, this, that, the other thing, were an effort to reverse the results of the 2016 election, prevent him from being elected in 2020, and now to prevent his return to the presidency in 2024. And guess what? He's right. He's right. It's all election interference. The Russiagate was election interference. I believe, even though I don't think he behaved that well in the Ukraine, I think the effort to get him out,
impeachment,
the first impeachment was election interference. This is all under and now we really do have we had these 4 cases, all of which were being brought, including the 2 Jack Smith cases. And there, by the way, is interesting constitutional stuff going on with Jack Smith's appointment. People following this, the Supreme Court is being asked to rule whether or not Jack Smith's appointment as special prosecutor, for reasons that are too recondite to explain, was itself illegitimate, and that these cases, the classified documents case and the January 6th case, should be dismissed because he is an illegitimate federal official in this prosecution. And that is not a gimme case for the Jack Smith should continue thing, but whatever. So it's all election interference. That's what he is going to claim. So I think basically the 2024 election will now turn on the question of whether or not enough Americans come to accept the argument that he has been persecuted and prosecuted, so that they should not be allowed to make a fair choice in the 2024 election if enough people who are on the sidelines in this race accept in the broadest contours his argument rather than the argument that he is a felon and therefore should not be president. It sort of comes down to that, really, if you think about it on this matter. Democrats are just going to say felon, 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 felon. And then he's going to say, they've just spent 8 years doing nothing but going after me, and they got one little scalp, and you know that it's bull, and I know that it's bull, and they know that it's bull. Are you going to let them make this decision for you?
Right. And, it's interesting to see his immediate reaction when Trump came out of the courtroom yesterday after the verdict. And he said the real verdict will be on November 5th, Election Day, which I thought was the right way to frame it. And I assume he'll say something similar during his press conference at 11 a.m. on Friday. Also worth noting, I believe the Biden campaign, not liberals in the culture smog, as Bob Turrell used to say, but the Biden campaign doesn't really know what to do, because the Robert De Niro stunt clearly backfired. Clearly, that was like a
old man shouting at people.
That was like the fireworks exploding before launch, right? Because when they going into the Robert De Niro appearance outside the courtroom earlier this week, you had kind of walk-up pieces in the media saying Biden is really going to embrace the Trump verdict. The Biden campaign is going to take a much more aggressive approach. Then Robert De Niro went out there and it was totally nuts. And so Biden hasn't said anything yet. The White House hasn't said anything. It's been interesting. It's been, now look, we're not even 24 hours after the verdict here as we record this at 9 a.m. on Friday, May 31st. But it was interesting to me that they're kind of taking a pause and letting all of their friends in the intelligentsia and in the media, and then the lower level Democrats, do their work for them.
Well, and there will be this question of the upcoming, between now and the sentencing for Trump is a debate.
Right.
And so there's also a question, to the earlier election interference point, there's going to be real-time questions of election interference depending on how much Trump's freedom is restricted in terms of travel, in terms of what he's able to do to campaign. And I do think our friend Mark Halpern had an interesting bit in his newsletter the other day about the concerns continue and actually have grown about Biden's competence at being able to debate, being able to actually continue to campaign at the pace he'll need to over the summer. Those are just general questions, regardless of the Trump stuff. So part of the pause might be in part, well, we've got to frame this where he can't be constantly responding to this stuff, because that requires a nimbleness and an ability to turn on a dime and really craft a political message in the moment that he might not right now be able to do.
Okay, I have two contrary opinions here. One of which is it's good for Biden that he's not doing anything. Let the focus be on Trump and let surrogates and others and his friends.
He's at the beach. He went to the beach last night.
No, but I'm saying whatever is the case, he doesn't need to say anything. All he can say is, we respect jury verdicts in this country. 12 people made a ruling. That's how we do it. The judge didn't make the verdict. The prosecutor didn't make the verdict. It's the jury that made the verdict. 12 good men and true, and there they were.
He said, we respect the rule of law. That's what
Trump told the Proud Boys, Biden should just stand back and stand by.
Right. And he's got 25 days to keep quiet, and then, if he is competent to do so, come out with a howitzer at the debate. Not telegraph what he's going to say, not make the case, but come out and say, you slept with a porn star, you paid her off, you've done this time and time again, you violated the law, you committed a felony. This is who you are. This is what you are. You are a convicted felon. You will be a convicted felon until you die. America doesn't want a convicted felon in the White House. And then he'll say, Hunter, 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 Hunter. Right. And Biden can say, you're on the ticket. I'm on the ticket. It's between you and me. You can talk about my son all you want. My son, whatever is the case with my son, you are a convicted felon. And I didn't convict you. You're saying I did it? 12 people on a jury spent 6 weeks hearing this case, and that is on you were convicted by them, not by me, not by my Justice Department, not by the Manhattan DA, not by the judge. 12 Americans who, without fear or favor, had a choice to acquit you or to convict you, and they convicted you. Now, Abe,
I don't think you should bring up. Oh, we'll get into that in a second.
No, yeah, go ahead.
But I just want to say, I don't think you should bring out the howitzer ever. I think you should mention it at the debate. I think you should be cooler about it, actually, because I don't think it's a good look, particularly given the nature of the conviction and of the trial.
And he wouldn't have your eloquence, John.
There's that too. Yeah.
Well, that's the other.
By the way,
is
the Hunter trial. The Hunter trial will be going on in the middle of the debate.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Right, but Hunter is not a candidate for the presidency of the United States.
Which he sure spends a lot of time in the White House, though, I think, which people.
But I'm just saying, Hunter is not the candidate
for his dad, though.
Yeah, I understand.
Not yet. He's not.
I'm not saying that he isn't. But I'm saying that.
Yeah, what will happen? What will the liberals say when Hunter's convicted of his crimes? Convicted felon. How dare you let him in the White House?
No, what are they going to say? They're going to say it's a tragic. A person.
We need to learn how to forgive.
We're sympathetic for drug users, not prostitute users.
No one,
right?
No one was harmed.
Yeah.
They're going to say it was a political prosecution.
Can I introduce one other element here?
They're going to say it was a political prosecution, a witch hunt, all that. They're going to say exactly.
I don't think they're going to defend. I don't think they're going to defend Hunter. I think they're just going to say this is a tragic personal story, and it's horrible, and it's a terrible thing that happened. And he had a gun, and he threw something in the garbage, and he's mean to his kids. And every family in America has that troubled person that we all. Don't you feel?
May I make a prediction?
Your cousin. Ernest, look what he's done to your Aunt Ethel and your Uncle Harry.
Who among us doesn't have an uncle who pays off the National Enquirer to kill the story too? I want to make a prediction though.
Yeah.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is one poll away from making the debate.
No, then they'll just rewrite the debate.
Well, if he is on, but think about it. If he's on stage, he will be, if he's on stage with the scenario you're presenting, he will be leading in the polls by the beginning of July.
Oh, that's funny. Because he can go both ways.
He can go both ways, and he can say he will be the stand-in for America. That said, he already is to some degree, but I think giving him the national spotlight will make him the stand-in for the America saying, what is going on in our country?
Literally the guy with the brainworm.
By the way, I don't even understand this for a minute. This is totally off the point. Why did CNN make these rules that made it even conceivable that he was going to get into this debate? This is their private debate. There's no presidential commission on debates. Creating these, if he gets 22% in the polls and he's on this number of ballots and all this, they want a debate between Biden and Trump. They do not want Kennedy in the debate. And I don't understand. Are they stupid? Is Mark Thompson stupid?
Yes.
Why did he do this? Okay,
stupidity is always the answer.
Okay, that's always Occam's razor. Okay, Abe, let's you and I have our little colloquy that we had last night. Okay. I'm saying, I'm now going to propose this. I think that Trump is going to take a hit in the next 2 weeks in the polls, despite the fact that there's a lot of talk that he's not going to take a hit in the polls. And I assign it, and so does Nate Silver. So you can take this. If you like Nate Silver, you can use that as good ballast. If you don't, then you can say, I don't know what I'm talking about. That the issue here is low information voters, that the people who are going to decide this election are low information. It's not highly educated suburban voters who just don't know what to do. It's low information voters. Independent voters went 12 points for Trump in the latest Marist, New York, I don't know, this Siena Marist poll. And those are low information voters, not the most sophisticated among us who are independent because they just can't, they're fiscally conservative, but they're socially liberal. They have such complicated views. These are people who don't know what the hell is going on and pay no attention to anything except how they're doing in Grand Theft Auto and what's happening.
Okay. I'm going to stop you. These are people who actually have jobs and kids and busy lives and don't make politics their bread and butter and don't see everything through political lenses. A lot of them are my friends and family, so I'm going to defend the people who aren't in the
Grand
Theft Auto players. And they are not Grand Theft Auto players.
Also, yes, they are, and they're also not paying any attention to anything, and what they'll know is the headline. The headline is Trump is a convicted felon. Mm-hmm. And they know that Biden is senile. So they do know that. So they have Biden senile versus Trump felon. And Trump felon is now going to move into the power position unless Biden rolls down the stairs or falls off a bike or does something in the middle of this to step on the Trump is a felon story. And I think that those people are going to go, no, I don't want him for president. He's a felon. And that his numbers will drop in the next week and a half. But they won't hold, because unlike Christine, I think most of them are pretty stupid and pretty uninformed. And they are kind of like the cat following the laser pointer light, and that something else will distract them in 2 weeks. And then their positions will change. I had enough of thinking wonderfully positive thoughts about independent voters. I'm not going to think them anymore. That's my line. And Abe, you think entirely differently.
Well, not entirely differently, but fundamentally, yeah, it becomes different, because I read Nate Silver's piece and I thought it was very intelligent and very interesting. And I get the idea that low information voters rely on headlines, but I'm betting that there's been a kind of inversion of the heuristic that low information voters use from, okay, I'm low information. So I'm just going to go with the official story. I think low information voters now are more inclined to say, I don't believe any of it. I think they're more inclined now to automatically reject the official story as opposed to rely on it. I could be wrong, and that change may not be total, but that's my sense.
They get their news from social media, so actually, I think that's probably part of the reason why. I think that's correct.
One of the most important pieces ever published in like the last 30 years was Mickey Kaus files on Slate, called the Failure Faster Thesis. Filer, where Mickey was talking about how and this is around 2000 when he wrote this piece.
Earlier, I think 98, yeah.
So even in the 90s, he was pointing out the news cycle moved so quickly that you can't even put your arms around one news event before you're on to the third subsequent event.
Yeah.
And in the decades since he wrote that piece, the news cycle has only sped up to the point where you're reacting to your iPhone push alert because there was bad traffic in Denmark. You get these news alerts. You're saying, Mr. Smith lost his balloon in Zimbabwe. News alert. So there are going to be so many of these push alerts in between now and the election.
Yeah,
we will be talking about something else. I guarantee it.
But
and so I agree, John. Trump might take a slight hit in the next couple of weeks, but By November, we'll be talking about something completely different.
But the low information voter is also someone who I think gains impressions rather quickly. And I think you're right that the news cycle is constantly changing. But I think they're going to look at this choice as, do I want this, rogue, outlawish, convicted felon former president who I've seen and heard, and on every push alert, everyone's telling me he's a felon and, no one's above the law? Or do I want this guy who's clearly going to spend a lot of time hiding between now and the election, who is clearly not all there cognitively? Like that, I'm sorry, that is a really powerful thing for people to have to weigh, because that is our binary choice unless RFK, has some sort of surge in the polls. That is the choice.
Then we add the former junkie conspiracy theorist.
Right. But lunatic, who is neither a felon nor seems cognitively impaired, except for the brainworm situation, which I will continue to bring up because it makes me laugh.
Don't be ableist, Christine.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. All of us are the guy with the brainworm. Yes, that's all of us.
Who among us does not have an Uncle Harry with a brainworm?
So I had this thing up on the New York Times today in the opinion section, and I wanted to know some writers' responses to this question. Will it matter? And it occurred to me while writing it that Biden and the liberal universe views this election as about Trump, and they're desperate to make this election about Donald Trump. But poll after poll after poll, the constancy over time, it seems to me that since September, this election has just been about Biden. It's about Biden. And it's about Biden's, not just his condition, about his performance in office. And so I think those same voters you're talking about, Christine, not only is it, this Biden guy, he's kind of, not all there. It's also prices have risen by almost 20% since he's been president. It's also the border is open. It's also what's going on with Israel. Why is the Democratic Party embracing these anti-Semites? And by the way, Russia is making gains in Ukraine, and it seems to me anyway, a not so low information voter, that China's getting ready to invade Taiwan. Maybe this year, maybe after the election. So I think this conviction is very satisfying psychologically to many on the left, and to many who just don't hate Trump, even if they're many who do hate Trump, even on the right. It's not going to make prices any lower. It's not going to reduce illegal crossings, and it's not making the world a safer place.
And I also think that there's two categories of things we may or may not like about a candidate, right? That makes them unfit. One category is they're personally unfit. Their values, whatever. Character matters. That's a character matters category. The other category is, if this makes me afraid for what this person will do once in office. All the character stuff is still built in, and not just because Trump has 110% name recognition, but also because this is where he benefits from having already been president. I think that the guy was already president of the United States. The convicted felon on paying off a stripper or whatever is, we've never had a convicted felon in the White House. Yeah, but you've had this guy in the White House. And this already
I don't want to make he's been a felon in the White House, and he lost the election in 2020, not because he was a felon. He didn't lose because of Russiagate. He didn't lose because of this. He didn't lose because of that. He lost because people didn't like how he had conducted his presidency in the last year of his presidency. So we have two incumbent presidents in a weird way running against each other. And the idea that this election was going to be about Trump and should be about Trump and all that is a fixation of the elite. It's not a rational way to view an election. And I think in the years as consequential as the last 3 years have been, with war in Ukraine, pull out of Afghanistan, the war in the Middle East, the campus protests, and inflation, and this inflationary spiral that is over, but has had this lingering residue that everybody has experienced. And so this is part of the liberal bubble delusion that they Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I totally agree. And I think also, unless you're one of them, well, I think they are missing something fundamental about this also, which is that they have come at Trump so hard for so long. I was watching this, all the coverage yesterday. I watched him come out, make a statement afterward. He doesn't look like a villain here. He just doesn't. To them, he does. He doesn't. This is not villain Trump.
Confirms everything they already assumed about what the other side was trying to do to him.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this. Do you think, I mean, do you guys think that is the slightly slumped shoulders and the kind of low energiness too plays into that? Because that's what I was wondering too. At first I was thinking, he didn't come bounding out of the courtroom, and even his statement didn't seem like he was like raring and ready to go with the, he kind of tripped over. Oh, that I should say something about that.
We're going to have to see. Right. But we're going to have to see.
I wonder if
later today.
There was a kind of, I don't want to say humility.
No, but I think all of it, I think it's been happening over time. It's not because of him. It's because circumstances. It's created a kind of softening of him. He's been in this cage. I mean, the bombast is not quite what it was.
Anyway, the other thing is that he now has something legitimate to talk about as opposed to something illegitimate to talk about, which is actually weirdly helpful to him potentially, which is to say, now he's not going to talk about how Georgia was stolen in 2020. He's going to talk about how he's a political prisoner, which is what his first major email came out. Now, he's not a prisoner yet, but he's going to say this line that he said 2 years ago.
Who is the MAGA guy who tweeted out Trump's image next to Mother Teresa and Nelson Mandela?
Yes, Mandela. Yes, I saw that.
Yeah.
He was in front of all of them, though. He was like,
of course. I mean, what? You're not going to put him in the background.
What is the
Jesus was convicted too. That was the meme that was
another one.
This is an advantage to him in this sense, which is that it's going to pull him out of the past and into the present. And that's good. That's good for him. Running on 2020 and 2024 was and this is maybe where the Democrats have made the biggest mistake possible. That was always going to help Biden, because it's like, what are you going to do for us now? All you care about is what happened and you lost, which most people think. So, stop talking about it. You're a lunatic. Now he's actually going to talk about something real about which there is real controversy in the country about when he keeps saying, I'm horribly mistreated, right? You weren't horribly mistreated because the voters of Arizona and Georgia voted you out. That was not horrible mistreatment. This, however, may be horrible mistreatment.
Right.
Enough people in the country will believe that you have an argument to make that isn't retrospective and pointless and does absolutely nothing for anybody in terms of their daily lives and what they need in order to get by. I want to move on to one last larger point in the world of terrible, crushing morosity, and that is the delegitimization of the United States. And I say that very with an understanding. I am not overstating the case. Let me lay out my scenario to you. The argument on not just on the MAGA right, but that will start becoming the common argument on the American right is that what has happened here is so untoward, and the weaponization of the legal system and the deep state and all of that from 2016 onward is so untoward that the American regime has moved into and the American elites have moved into a place in which this country is now facing a legitimacy crisis, and that in fact the American dream is over, the American experiment is over, and that America is illegitimate. This argument will be heard on the right from now until November. And you're going to hear the opposite from the left, which is the legitimacy crisis may be over. Our democracy has been saved. Trump has been held to account. This is, a jury found him guilty. Judge Merchan is a saint. Alvin Bragg should be hoisted on the shoulders of angels. Whatever it is that they're going to say. Now imagine that Trump wins. It's November 5th and Trump wins. It all flips. America saved itself from the legitimacy crisis as the right. It saw through this effort to destroy it, It said, you go back home to your college campuses and to your gated communities and to your Hamptons houses and suffer. And you know what? Not only that, we're coming after you now with our techniques. And then Bob Kagan and Ann Applebaum and the editorial page of the New York Times and the editorial page of the New York Post and everyone else is going to say, well, it's happened. American democracy is over. We've now elected a convicted felon as president who is the most evil person who has ever lived, who wants to, who's going to suspend the Constitution and run for a third term in 2028 and all of that. So the entire political spectrum, in my scenario here, gets a bite at the America is illegitimate, the country, our democracy is over. And I don't know what the long-term consequences of that are, but they seem pretty horrifying to me. Being an American and believing in the American system has now become entirely conditional on outcomes. And that, and this is what we've seen it. It's been creeping up on us for 8 years, and it's now about to blossom full bore. And then there are like 12 of us in the middle who are like, this is still the greatest experiment. We still have a constitution. Nobody else has it. All blah, 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 blah. And yet I don't think, this is Jonah's remnant idea. Like, we're the last standing people who will believe in all of this and say, you know what, even if people are elected you don't like, even if there are Supreme Court decisions you don't like, even if a convicted felon is elected president, none of that delegitimizes the United States. But I don't know that we're going to be there in, winning that argument.
I would just say that the size of the population that will argue that democracy is over, Trump wins, is larger than the size of the population that has been kind of venting on Twitter since the verdict and saying that this calls into question the legitimacy of the Constitution and the government. The MAGA folks who are beyond just saying that this was a miscarriage of justice, which I view it as a miscarriage of justice, but the ones who go even further and say that this somehow a repudiation of everything and of the legitimacy of the government, I think that's a fairly small population. They can, as we saw on January 6th, small groups can cause a lot of havoc for sure. But when compared with the size of the intelligentsia who will argue that if Trump is elected, democracy in America is over and there needs to be some type of color revolution in order to prevent Trump from even taking office, that's a larger group. And that's a more influential group.
And what if we then combine the two stories of 2024 thus far, right? One story is Trump getting convicted, and the other story is the campus protests. And it's November 5th, and Trump wins. There is a weaponized, activated Pan-American mob.
I was just thinking of this.
That can be pulled onto the streets at a moment's notice with the same iPhone that you get, Mr. Smith's balloon exploded over Zimbabwe. Like, it's exactly the same group of people. They're all on Discord. They're on Discord groups. They get a message. They show up. Who knows what happens between November? You think January 6th was bad? Well, who knows?
This was a problem in the last election. I mean, this city, I live in D.C., the city was preparing for a Trump victory by boarding up downtown and getting prepared for the mobs that would be enraged because Trump won re-election. And so that's going to scale up much more so in 2024.
Except they're not, that's what they did in 2020. Yeah. In 2024, Brandon Johnson in Chicago is not going to be boarding anything up. He is going to welcome the mobs who come out to say that Trump is illegitimate.
Well, that's the other thing is that you mentioned the campus protests, which have been visited by members of Congress, right? The other day at Wayne State, Rashida Tlaib, after leaving a conference that was essentially a Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine party, he went to the Wayne State protest encampment and said, well, if you're going to dismantle it, you got to go through me, a member of Congress. And, we've mentioned previously that Ilhan Omar went to Columbia one and this sort of thing. So they're going to be, it's not just the sort of disconnected thing. I mean, they're literally going to be standing, like hooking arms with members of Congress on those lines. I'm not sure anybody knows what the limits of a mob that has members of Congress either nearby or among it will. I
mean, I think if the protests take that form, they will not have the public on their side.
But they don't need
the fake handcuffs again.
But they don't need the public on their side. I mean, they don't have the public on their side now. They haven't had the public on their side for months.
They just need to create chaos.
They will create chaos, and they will create chaos on the grounds that America is now an illegitimate country. And this is where the left has been going now for, 60 years, and they will finally have the fulfillment of their 1960s fantasies in full bore, right? They will have, as Ruth Marcus, we began this podcast talking about Ruth Marcus saying, if you're going to catch the king, you better kill the king. And now they think like, well, they caught the king, and they put a couple of knives in the king, right? If he survives it and thrives and wins, and maybe wins even as partially a result of them getting and stabbing him in the first place, then all bets are off. And even Ruth Marcus, in other words, like, let's just take neurasthenic liberal opinion, even people who think, well, these campus protests are really bad. You think they're going to say that the protests against Trump are really bad? We're going to have started with the Pussy Hats in 2017 to open celebration on the part of the American elite of cities burning down in the equivalent of 1968. And the idea, no, cooler heads must prevail. Like they didn't seem. I just think
the one missing element in your argument is that if Trump wins, it will be because he does better among city populations than any Republican as in half a century. So who's rioting in this scenario? The editorial board of the New York Times. Yeah, I guess liberal, but that's my point. If it's the Hamasniks turn on a dime and start protesting Trump as part of the Omni cause, I just don't think it's going to carry much weight with the majority.
Let me ask you another opinion then that rises from this. So we talked about how the Republican convention takes place 4 days after the sentencing of Trump on July 11th, and there's this question of what kind of turnout there will be for protests in Milwaukee. And then 3 weeks later, is the Democratic. We have been sort of assuming that there would be protests against Biden on the part of the pro-Hamas left in Chicago. Does this change that calculus a little bit? Will the cause shift a little bit? No. Matt's saying no. Okay.
No, it's an internationally backed effort to globalize the Intifada. It's not going to end until it's broken apart. And of course, Israel is making progress in Rafah and making progress in the border with Egypt. So the war is going to continue for at least perhaps through the end of the year, which means that they're not going anywhere. I mean, something we've been saying. Okay. That's my point. I think the conviction matters. Obviously, it's another historical precedent set in this election. We've never had an election like this before in American history. That's clear. But I don't think the election itself will turn on the conviction. It will turn on these broader events and cultural patterns that we've spent the past couple minutes talking about.
Last question. In 1995 or 6, I can't remember now what year, the OJ verdict came down.
95.
I guess it was 95 because that was like the 6th issue of the Weekly Standard. I should remember that. That was the fall of 1995. And viewed now from the perspective of like more than a quarter century, that was a cultural turning point in many, many different ways. Created reality TV, sort of created cable TV news to the 24-hour news cycle. It created this antinomian spirit among populations who thought, like, okay, it's good that he was acquitted because, it's a sign that people are now taking seriously the injustices in the judicial system toward Black people. It created the idea that Black people were looking for special privileges. It created all kinds of countervailing tendencies that we have been coping with to this day. And I wonder, even though you're saying it's not going to matter that much, whether the things that I was laying out about the left saying America's illegitimate, the right saying America's illegitimate, all of these things, that this is the culmination, this verdict, maybe the culmination of the moment at which the next 25 years of how we are going to conduct politics are laid out, all of which have been suggested over the last, couple of decades, delegitimizing individual people, coming up with stories like he was 15 and there was a house, I don't even know where the house was, and he and his friend threw me on a bed and I blacked out, and and so 40 years later, even though this didn't happen and the whole thing was a lie, he shouldn't become a Supreme Court justice. Like, we have all these kind of predicates, but this is the moment at which, like, it's Calvin ball, right? All rules are now out the window in politics. You can convict anybody for anything. You can attack them for anything. You can raise unlimited amounts of money on both sides of the aisle for anything. And that elections resolve nothing, and the fight will just be ever present and omnipresent. It will be impossible for there to be any bipartisan agreements on anything, because everyone is going to be trying to throw everyone else in jail.
I don't think it's just this moment, though. I mean, this is the topper, and it's the most recent. But the country's been hit by a series of just seismic convulsions, since really beginning, I would say, with Trump's election itself, and how everyone responded to that, COVID, and the lockdowns and the disinfo, the Russiagate, January 6th, Hunter's laptop, Biden hiding it, and on and on. The campus protest. I mean, for so many people, so many of these incidents represented the all bets are off moment. And this will be another one for some. But there's a lot of destabilizing events that we've been through in quick succession.
Yeah, I believe big changes are coming, whoever wins. And whether it's Biden or Harris winning with the Democratic majority, they'll abolish the filibuster. They'll start pushing through the federalization of elections. They'll codify Roe for all 50 states, end all limits on abortion. And that'll be the beginning. And then obviously that will mean changes on the right as well, as it reacts to what they do. If Trump wins, he's going to try to basically gut the federal government. And the reaction to him in office, again, as we said, will be very destabilizing. It's unclear how he'll react to that. And so, amidst a background of this type of lawfare, which I now think Republicans are going to begin embracing as well, having lived through it now and seeing the consequences, America's going to look very different in 4 years than it does today. And this is, it's not unexpected. This is a very different country than it was even during the OJ verdict, John.
Yeah.
The different people, different age breakdowns, different technology, it's different manners, with different expectations of personal behavior, and it's just a different country. And this is what we're getting. This is the result of where our country has gone. So it's sad, but I don't find it surprising that this is where we're headed.
So I just want to make two final points then, which is that I used OJ as the crossing of the Rubicon, and I'm probably wrong. I think culturally, the OJ verdict was momentous I mean, you can peel and not politically, but really culturally. The politically momentous thing was the Clinton, was 1998 and Clinton, and the decision of the Democratic Party to embrace the idea that personal conduct and personal behavior as a politician no longer should be a key deciding element in how people think about politics. Now, no one really does that. They do anyway, but that this was something that a party embraced as a kind of almost theological matter. And then again, chickens came home to roost, because Trump would have been impossible without the Clinton impeachment, Clinton surviving the impeachment in two ways. He would have been impossible because no candidate could have run with his history and his record and his personal behavior. And the other is that Hillary Clinton wouldn't have been the nominee that he ran against, and somebody else without her flaws and failings would have run against Trump and would have won. So there is that. And then, of course, Trump then just shatters all political norms. But he could only shatter the political norms because they were shatterable. He is not the change. He is a change agent in the sense that he was the embodiment of the change. But the change was going to come, whether it was him in 2016 or some other version of him in 2020. There were these precursor moments, Jesse Ventura's election in Minnesota, other such things. And yeah, it's a different country, but we always had this one thing. We've always had this one thing since 1789 or 1791. We have had the Constitution of the United States as the governing document of the United States. Presidents come, presidents go. They're corrupt, they're this, they're that, they're awful, they're terrible. Congress is bad, Supreme Court can be bad, all of that. But we have this binding glue of this document and the rule of law that it enshrined in a way that it has never been enshrined anywhere else. And I think that's the question now is, will this be a country in which people say, we need to do X, Y, or Z because that is what the Constitution demands of us? Or are we now in, again, Calvin ball, like just there are no rules, and if we don't like the Constitution, we just pass laws the president can make laws, Congress can never make a budget, everything you're supposed to do, you're not doing. And you're doing other things. And that's my fear. I'm not an apocalyptic person. I really am not, despite the crushing morosity. But, and everything is a hinge moment. But it feels like we are approaching a genuine hinge moment in which the American public loses respect for America itself as not only the greatest country on earth, but as the place that secures their freedoms, guarantees their freedoms, guarantees, a fair political system. And
yeah, I mean, those fears are justified, but July 4th is coming up in a month, and people will be out on the streets. People will be having parades, and people still do love this country and love their political institutions. It's hard to tell because of what's happening in our politics, but that is still there. So all is not lost, John. Put on a happy face.
Our morosity brand, still ironic, not literal.
Okay. As we head into this weekend, the sun is shining. There's not a cloud in the sky. Okay. Enjoy the great outdoors.
Okay. Well, we will be closing our show today, as we close every Friday now, with an AI-generated song with lyrics by our own contributing editor, Eli Lake. It should be noted that this song, I need to introduce it by saying that this song was written from the perspective not of your classic commentary listener or reader or panelist here, but rather as a kind of evocation of the mood of the very people that we are criticizing, the kind of the MSNBC liberal, and how that person is probably feeling this morning. So for Abe, Seth, Christine, Matt, I'm John Butthortz. Keep the candle burning, and please enjoy our latest weekend ending number, Donald Trump is Going to Prison.